Good morning. I hope everyone is having a great summer, and the summer seems like it's going full speed. We're in August. Hard to believe we've been in this pandemic so long, and that the year is getting by us so quickly. I'm coming this Sunday virtually because one, I'm still on vacation, and two, I wanted to attend the church camp out in the Gila, and doing the service pre-recorded this time would allow me to do both of those. I have had a good vacation thus far, and I want to thank Maggie Locatelli for being in charge of the services over the summer, along with Catherine and the other members of the worship team. And I have full gratitude for the ministers and teachers who have preached during my absence. And I am sure that they all were inspiring and lifted you up in many important ways and have done a great job in my absence. Well, last year I was on the UUA Skinner Sermon Award panel and had the opportunity of grading several sermons. And I preached one of them already about life in an institution. And today I want to preach another one called Love Me in My Shame. I just found this sermon to be very helpful to me, and it was very inspiring also. And I think it does a great justice to this notion of naming shame and how shame can have such a big impact in our lives. It was preached by my colleague um, last February, so several months ago. I hope that this sermon works well for you today. Love me in my shame. Perhaps you are already aware of Unitarian Universalism's 7 principles, a denominational statement which articulates values and attitudes that cut across all our differences of opinion, a statement which unites us and gives us a common core. But have you ever heard of the 7 anti-Unitarian Universalist principles? Well, the answer is no, because I cooked them up just yesterday. Anti-principle number 7, the only existence that matters is human existence. This is exactly opposite of our real 7th principle, which affirms respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. See how the anti-principle logic goes. Anti-principle number 6, the goal of America first, versus the real 6th principle, which affirms the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Anti-principle number 5, might makes right, versus the real 5th principle, which affirms the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Anti-principle number 4, the uncritical consumption of alternative facts, versus the real 4th principle, which affirms a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Isn't it interesting to see our principles from an anti point of view? I think it helps make them even more meaningful and valuable, and maybe you do too. But there's more. Anti-principle number 3, judgmentalism towards one another and spiritual apathy in our congregations, versus the real 3rd principle, which affirms acceptance of one another and encouragement of spiritual growth in our congregations. Anti-principle number 2, oppression, bullying, and humiliation in human relations, versus the real 2nd principle, which affirms justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And finally, anti-principle number 1, the inherent shamefulness of every person, versus the real 1st principle, which affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person. All of the anti-principles are at play in our world today, and as Unitarian Universalists, we are called to resist. This is fundamentally not about politics, but about faithfulness to our core values as a religion. No political party is exempt from critique when they endorse or implement policies that run contrary to our principles. When I stand in this pulpit, I stand in it not as a Democrat or Republican or Libertarian or as something else, but as a Unitarian Universalist. I promise you that. Now, it would take years and many sermons to do justice to all the ways in which the seven anti-principles plague our world. So today, I'm narrowing my focus, and I will do that on something that might not get a lot of time in UU pulpits or pulpits of any kind: shame. Unitarian Universalism's first principle says that people are fundamentally worthy. Shame says people are fundamentally worthless. The first principle says that a person's essential value is unconditional. Shame is a voice in your head saying, you are not good enough. You will never be good enough. Who do you think you are? Getting laid off and having to tell your partner who is relying on you triggers shame. Having someone ask you, when are you due? But you are not pregnant. Shame. Hiding the fact that you're an alcoholic. Hiding that fact from all the people who think you're perfect. Shame. Losing your temper once again with the kids over something stupid. Shame. Bankruptcy. Shame. Your partner sitting in the passenger side telling you how to drive. That's shame. Being infected with an STD. Shame. Committing a microaggression and you did not mean to. Such shame. Infertility triggers shame. Your boss calling you an idiot in front of the client. So shaming. You are just being yourself, but someone calls you out, says you're acting too big for your britches. The shame. You will never be good enough. Who do you think you are? Oh, ouch. Our first principle is beloved because it brings us back to our unconditional worth and it makes us feel calm and centered and whole. But shame makes us forget. Shame makes us feel like the life is being strangled out of us. We're being pulled down into an abyss of soul-crushing chaos. The experience is simply so traumatic that we instinctively defend against it. We do anything to make it go away. Shame researchers tell us that there are essentially three things people do. One is to move away from shame, to withdraw from all that triggers it, to hide, to become silent, to keep secrets. Here's where you vanish from others and you vanish from yourself. Another thing people do is to move towards shame, allow it to melt our sense of personal integrity and erase personal boundaries, so that it makes perfect sense to practice abject people pleasing, to allow another to walk all over you, to enable bad behavior. Yet a third thing people can do in the face of the strangling, soul-sucking sensation of shame is to move against it. This looks like aggression against the person who appears to have triggered your shame. This looks like bullying. This looks like violence. Shame is so painful. We do anything to wriggle out of its grasp. So against this anti-principle, the real first principle brings peace. The real first principle that affirms our inherent worth and dignity is like the poem from Rolf Jacobson that I read during the opening words. It goes like this: all people are children when they sleep. They open their hands and breathe in that quiet rhythm heaven has given them. They pucker their lips like small children and open their hands halfway. Soldiers and statesmen, servants and masters. When people sleep, all our social distinctions and differences fall away. We're all equally children of God. But shame is the war in us. Shame is the sickness. Shame makes us vulnerable to aggression, depression, eating disorders, addictions, violence, and suicide. I would even go as far as to suggest that the seeds of anti principles 2 through 7 are planted by anti principle number 1. This is why it is urgent that we talk about what researcher Brene Brown calls shame resilience, but what we Unitarian Universalists could also call, very simply, the practice of our first principle. The practice of our first principle begins with raising awareness, which is what you and I are doing right here and right now. Shame is real, and it's not just an internal state that stays inside, it infects the world. We need to know this and we need to speak it. Shame, says Brene Brown, derives its power from being unspeakable. Shame hates having words wrapped around it, but we are wrapping words around it today. We are naming it today. And the next thing we do as a part of our practice of our first principle is to reality check the shame. President Obama once said something in his book, Dreams from My Father, that we need to hear right now. He said, and I quote, "We might be locked in a world not of our own making, but we still have a claim on how it is shaped. One of the ways we are locked into a world not of our own making is through racialization. We are made black and we are made white and we are made brown and on and on. And all that entails an impersonal prejudicial system backed by social power is reproduced through us. Biases and prejudices are implanted in us without our permission. And the white supremacy system, I'm just going to name it as I see it because it sure ain't a black supremacy system, reinforces itself through shame. Shame is what locks us in. Black women shame when they wear their hair naturally. The internalized racism that shames people of color. A white child shamed when he notices that his friend's skin color is different from his, and he asks about that loudly in public. Be silent, the white mother says, feeling ashamed. And she says what she says and feels the shame she feels because she has been racialized all her life to be blissfully ignorant of all matters race related. Therefore, she thinks that the very act of talking about race is racist. Shame keeps us locked in, so we must name it. We must reality check it. We must practice shame resilience. The message of Black Lives Matter, this banner that so many of our congregations nationwide have posted outside for all the world to see, is really about shame resilience. Our Unitarian Universalist principle, or our first principle, promises something to us regarding all the forces that want to lock us in. They can try as hard as they want, but we still have a claim on how our story is shaped. Yet another dimension of this relates to the world of gender identity, how gender messages and expectations are foundational shame triggers. Patriarchy is the word for a system of meanings and practices that shape appropriate masculine and feminine identity. Patriarchy wields a cattle prod to keep people towing the line, and that cattle prod is shame. Consider this gender expectation: be perfect, don't make a fuss about it, and don't take time away from anything like your family or your partner or your work to achieve your perfection. If you're truly worthy, perfection should be easy. Is this a primarily masculine or feminine expectation? What do you think? Then there's this gender expectation: never allow people to think you're weak. Be all adequate in all aspects of life. Don't ask for help. Primarily masculine or feminine? Or what about this? Say what's on your mind, but don't upset anyone or hurt anyone's feelings. Primarily masculine or feminine? Or this: never cry or show emotion except at sporting events. It's okay then. But anger is always permissible everywhere because anger is strength. Primarily masculine or feminine? The primarily feminine gender expectations are the first and third, and both are classic double binds. There's no way to win. Think of our past female presidential candidates and the hoops they had to jump through. Anything they did, anything women do, is going to disappoint the rule of patriarchy and trigger shame. So, one common solution is to repress one's Wonder Woman potentials, to learn to stay small, stay sweet, stay quiet, stay modest. But the side product of this is inevitable repressed rage, and it comes out as mean spiritedness, very often towards other women who refuse to stay small. This is what happens. As for the primarily masculine expectations, the second and fourth, it's all about not being a wimp. Don't show fear. Don't show inadequacy. You do that and people shame you. Other men shame you. Other women shame you. That's right. The keepers of the patriarchy aren't just men. One of the many refreshing and surprising things that Brene Brown surfaces through her shame research is to find that, quote, in those moments when real vulnerability happens in men, most women recoil with fear. And that fear manifests as everything from disappointment to disgust, end quote. She goes on to quote a male friend who says, men know what women really want. They want us to pretend to be vulnerable. We get really good at pretending. It's just hard for everyone. However, you have been gendered under patriarchy, but it gets more manageable when you are aware of the unrealistic expectations that send you into your shame spiral. And on this basis, you can reality check it. As someone who identifies primarily with the feminine, you can say no to the double bind. As someone who identifies primarily with the masculine, you can say no to the demand that you are always and in all ways strong. And if you are gender non binary or gender fluid, whenever one or the other sets of standards tries to get you to dance their tune, just say no. We have to reality check the unrealistic expectations and name and claim the shame. I wish someone had preached this sermon to me years ago. Years ago, male shame was a factor in ending my marriage, and I didn't see it. I didn't see it until recently, actually. Over the years, I've gone over the whole thing again and again. And as you can imagine, I thought I had sifted through the experience thoroughly and discovered everything there was to be discovered. But I hadn't. Reflecting on the shame this week led me to connecting some dots that I hadn't connected before. It's actually rather simple. My wife back then was fully in her world of work. It was a world that I was not a part of, even as my work world was separate from hers. And that fact, that she gained such satisfaction and grew so much from a world completely a part of me, triggered shame. It meant I could not provide all she needed, and to the male in me, there was only one conclusion. It meant I was weak. It meant I was unworthy. Years of feeling this unworthiness melted my insides. I did not know how to talk about it. I did not know what was happening. I could not reality check. I could not recover. What I did was withdraw into my work, withdraw into my hobbies, hide. My wife would reach out and I would step back. The result was mutual desperation. I just didn't have the awareness and the reality checking skills I do now. I've earned them the hard way. And I am telling this story despite the fact that I might very well have committed the grave sin of pastoral oversharing, of pastoral TMI. But I risk this because I want to demonstrate through my own life yet another way to practice the first principle. Tell your shame stories to people who love you and you trust them. Tell your shame stories to people who will respond, not with criticism or condescension, not with armchair quarterbacking, but by turning right back around and telling their shame stories to you. What happens is the building of empathic connection. Shame can't survive shared empathy. It just can't. We have been locked into racial identities and gender identities and other identities not of our own making. And shame, not recognized, not reality checked, not spoken, keeps us there. But our Unitarian Universalist first principle tells us that we don't have to believe in that shame, in the lie that that shame is trying to spread. Black people and white people and people of all colors can grow into racial identities that are healthy and liberating. We can grow into forms of manhood and womanhood and gender fluidity, any other hoods of gender orientation there may be that liberate, not constrict and wound. White supremacy culture be damned and patriarchy be damned. I am asking you to love me in my shame and love each other in your shame. Love. Do it because you are Unitarian Universalist and this religion calls you to it. We cultivate love, Brene Brown says, when we allow our most vulnerable and powerful selves to be deeply seen and known. And when we honor the spiritual connection that grows from that offering with trust, respect, kindness, and affection. Love is not something we give or get. It is something that we nurture and grow, a connection that can only be cultivated between two people when it exists within each one of them. We can only love others as much as we love ourselves. That's what she says. All I know is that the seven Unitarian Universalist anti principles plague our world right now. But if we start cultivating love, if we can practice the real first principle love, If we can love ourselves and love each other, even in the midst of our deepest shame, then there is freedom. Then there is release. Then there is humanity. And then those seven anti-Unitarian Universalist anti-principles, or let me say that again, those seven Unitarian Universalist anti-principles, they don't stand a chance. Amen. Ashe, and may it be so.